Welcome back. Today we're going to be looking at date and time in Python. And of course, the time is something very useful to know in a lot of applications, and also the date. So the way you can use that in Python is by using time and datetime modules, which are both really useful. And these modules have some special attributes which are very useful, and they're that objects of these types are immutable, so you can't change them. Once you've created one, it stays as it is. And therefore it's hashable, so you can use them as dictionary keys, and you can also use them in sets as well. And finally, they can be pickled using pickle, although we haven't looked at pickle yet, but it's something useful to know. So the first thing we're going to do is import datetime and time. And obviously nothing happens. So here we're using the time module, and we're going to sleep for 5 seconds. And this is a really great way, using the time module, to add a pause to your program. So if we run it, this is waiting, and then 5 seconds later it prints done. It is worth noting, however, that while this happens, nothing else can happen. So it's useful, but there are obviously limitations. And another thing that's quite useful about the time module is that it's got all of these different attributes. So alt zone is telling us how far away we are from UTC. The daylight is telling us that we're daylight saving. The time zone is 0, which means that currently we're at GMT, and then it prints the time zone name at the bottom. Now we're going to have a look at the datetime module, and one of the most useful things is a time delta. So if you want to work out how long a certain period of time is. And you can see you can put in weeks, days, hours, minutes, seconds, and so on. So in this first one, it's a few seconds. In the second one, it's about a day and a half. And in this final one, we've got 4 weeks and 10 days. But you'll notice that in the first one, it's converted it into seconds. In the second one, it's put the day and the hours, well, the time separately. And in the final one, it's worked out the total number of days. So 4 weeks is 28 days, and then 10 more days is 38 days. However, the thing that's useful about time deltas is you can do maths. So you see, if we add up these two, we get a new time delta, which is a certain number of days and a certain number of seconds. And so the maths that you can do with datetime is addition, subtraction, multiplication, both by an integer and a float, division, which gives you a float. You can divide it, you can do floor division, you can do modular arithmetic, and then you get time delta. You can do div mod, which I haven't seen but is very similar. You can get negative time deltas. You can take the modulus of the time delta, convert it into a string, or you can turn it into a string using repr, which gives you a lot of freedom about how you do maths with your date times. You can also have negative time deltas. So you can see this is -1 day and a certain number of seconds. And then we can work this out as the total number of seconds. And this total seconds function is useful because if we take this and try comparing it to 0, we get an error because you can't compare a time delta with an integer. But instead we can then compare the time delta number of seconds to 0 and say that it's less than 0. And so you can say whether something happened before or after something else. Then you've got a date, and there are many ways of getting the date. So today tells us the current date. From timestamp gets a date from the number of milliseconds since this special date. From ordinal, it's telling you the date since the 1st of January. And then from ISO format, you have to have this exact format. So this 0 is compulsory. And then from ISO calendar, it uses the year, the week, and then the day of the week. So you can see there are all these different dates. And then additionally, you can do maths with time deltas and dates. So you can see that today's date a week ago would have been the 5th of December. And you can also see some information using these calendar methods. So we get the date today, and then it tells us the weekday, which is 5, which is a Saturday. And then the ISO weekday, which it just adds 1 to, which is still a Saturday. This is more useful if you're using a list, and this is kind of more useful if you're displaying it. And then the calendar tells us that it's the 50th week and the 6th day of the year. Then you can use the datetime object, which has date and time. There's also a datetime.time module, but probably won't look at that. And you can see that you can initialize the current date time in all these different ways. And they're ever so slightly different because it takes a very small amount of time to run. And again, you can do Datetime Maths. And so if we run this, you see that we've got a time delta of 5 seconds, which we get from there, and then 3,985 microseconds, which come from the time in between. Then we can also get now, which is the date time. We can get the date, the time, and the time TZ. So that's the time and then the time zone. We can also get the current timestamp, which is a very useful way of comparing dates because you just got a number, and that's the same as doing this calculation here, where you can compare the current time to the 1st of January 1970. Note that I've put the time zone as being the UTC time zone, which I did up here. And then we get the total number of seconds, and you'll see that these are the same. Another thing that's really useful is being able to format time. And so there's this table here that tells you all these different ways of formatting. So these are the most useful ones. I think there are a couple of others, but you can get the month as a number or the full name. You can get short names for everything. You can get the date and time, a local version of the time. If you want to print a percentage sign, because of course you've got all these special characters, you just use 2 percentage signs. And then of course we can fill that in with other characters. So here we're putting in the day, the month, the year, the hour, the minute, the second, and then putting slashes in. Here we're just doing the date, and again it's got all the slashes in. Here we're putting the current time in a special format, and then here we put the time, but we use a mod P to show that it's PM, and then all of these will show the time. And then of course you can do that with dates as well as just times, and it's worth noting that when we do it with the date, the time we get at the end ends in 0000 because a date always assumes the time is midnight. So as you can see, time is a really useful thing to understand in Python. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. You can now use time in any of your programs, and I'll see you again same time next week. Till then.